William Conway Whittle, C.S.N., and this risk was only the first in a Homeric voyage that promised more and ever more terrible risks. What a busy day these 24 hours have been. Thank God we have a fine set of men and officers, and although we have an immense deal to contend with, we are industrious and alive to the emergency. Just the sort of mild pleasantries, aside from that emergency, one might expect from the mind of a slightly built 24-year-old with narrow sloping shoulders, a high, almost scholarly forehead crowned by a severely combed pompadour, narrow-set, vaguely disapproving eyes, and a small mouth that gave no hint of the eloquent mind inside. He could have been a schoolmaster or an assistant bank clerk. But on this day, October 26, 1864, young Lieutenant Whittle commenced the log of an odyssey that would take its place among the most evocative testimonials produced by the Civil War. Sea King's cargo of coal had been a ruse. The emergency was real. The coal had been the final camouflage in a desperate, none-such skein of conspiracy conceived and carried out over many months by Whittle and senior agents of the Confederacy, working discreetly in London and Paris late in the Civil War. A scheme to obtain this speedster of a ship, this Sea King, from the English merchant navy with the quiet consent of Queen Victoria herself, load up a cargo of the black fumy stuff, and, keeping her disguised as a harmless freighter, ease her out of the harbor at London, down the Thames into the English Channel, and from there toward her destiny as a killer of Yankee vessels. She would be met by her rebel crew and her supply of armaments somewhere on the open ocean, far from the prying eyes of Yankee spies. Sea King's cover story was virtually airtight. There was just one tie to the Confederacy when she finally left England. In fact, there was only one rebel on board at all, and he was undercover Lieutenant William Conway Whittle, C.S.N., also known as Mr. Brown. Conway Whittle was an ideal figure for this mission. He'd been personally selected by top Confederate operatives in Europe to be the ship's executive officer, second in rank only to the captain. On the heels of his dashing exploits as a blockade runner, Whittle had been secretly summoned to Paris in September 1864. There he met with Commodore Samuel Barron, a lifelong friend of Whittle's father, Commodore W.C. Whittle, and one of young Lieutenant Whittle's primary mentors. Commodore Barron was also one of the key figures in the Confederacy's hopes to patch together a navy from a European base. Barron handed young Whittle a letter that contained his instructions. He was to make his way via Liverpool to London and check into the fashionable Woods Hotel under the Brown alias. On the Friday morning of October 7th, carrying a newspaper and dressed in unobtrusive business attire, the young man was to take a seat in the hotel dining room, pull the corner of his napkin through a buttonhole in his jacket, and await a stranger who would ask him, "Is this Mr. Brown?" This figure would be Richard Wright, an elderly Liverpool businessman who'd become wealthy through his investments in Southern cotton. It was Wright who had discreetly purchased the ship, then known as Sea King, and was in London to arrange its transfer to the Confederate Navy. After the Woods Hotel rendezvous, Wright took Brown toward the East India Dock so that the younger man could get a covert glimpse of the exquisitely built black three-masted Extreme clipper he would board before dawn the next day. Then, in his final act as the ship's owner, Wright took Whittle to a safe house, where he introduced him to Captain Peter S. Corbett, Sea King's interim captain, and formally gave Corbett power of attorney to sell the ship at any time to any suitable offer. As all three knew, it was an offer already accepted. At 3 a.m. on Sunday, October 8th, Brown performed the final act in the elaborate ruse concocted for him. He checked out of the hotel and headed for the waterfront, stumbling and reeling like a drunken man. At the dock, he gazed upward at Sea King's bowsprit, then pretended to steady himself for what would appear to be any old besotted sailor's last-minute return on board after a night of AWOL pub crawling. No one moved to stop him. Still, rather than risk the conspicuous gangway, he crawled over Sea King's low-slung hull near the fore-rigging. Within moments, the ship cast off and began to idle her way down the Thames, the first small leg of a voyage that would take her around the world. Sea King's slow passage toward the Atlantic was excruciatingly hazardous, a gauntlet that could doom her at any moment.